Okay, welcome everyone. This is going to be beginning this set of I'm not going to call it review tutorials, but this concept of what are the important things besides getting the geometry when you're drafting an AutoCAD. So I'm starting here knowing you have to start in the right template, and I'm actually over here in something called the paper space or the layout tab or the model tab. If I click back and forth, remember we use the model tab to deal with the model, which is infinitely not just an infinite plane, but an infinite X, Y, and Z. You remember our workspace down here that many of you have been dealing with. And remember that even though it shows that this is 2D, in all reality, it always is 3D, and so there'll be lots of different places you can tab. When you change that here, you get a set of different tools, which makes you think that you're now working in 3D, but you're always potentially in 3D. So I just want to point that out. So I'm going to go now back to keep it in 2D, drafting and annotation, and much of the things you see will kind of continue here. Now, in terms of screen real estate, we have the ribbon going across the top that we can kind of get rid of or bring back. Remember, up till now, we've been using this ribbon predominantly for maybe one or two things, and that is that we had choices of circles that were really thrown at us. You see that all the modified tools are there, and there is basically a set of tabs around here that you're going to be able to use and manage. But as I've mentioned before, I tend to save this for some of the advanced level tools. So if you're working in Civil 3D, you have the ribbon for Civil 3D, and the rest of these ribbons, if you would, are tied to that higher end project. I will mention, however, that the ribbon later becomes context sensitive, a lot like we have right now set up in our other settings. One thing it's nice to see in this ribbon, you can see there is a layers portion for the ribbon, which is going to include a spot for the layer state, what's on, what's off, what's red, what's blue in your layers. And also here the properties, which you generally want to always have lined up by layer. One thing we never want to do is lose all of our toolbars. So if we remember the command minus toolbar, we'll always bring in, or minus toolbars, I always forget, we'll bring up the toolbar. I think you can also right click here, tool palette group. There's all kinds of different things you can click, but basically the command if you lose them, minus toolbar, and then you bring up the draw toolbar. We generally keep that to the left. We right click, we bring up the modify toolbar, though most of the time we're modifying by left clicking on something to select it and then left clicking on the spinny point. I'm going to get rid of those so I don't see them. I'm going to right click and tend to bring up our layers. This is what we're going to start using a fair bit. I'll right click and bring up the standard. Right. I will right click and bring up the inquiry for those who don't want to learn the commands list, and you can kind of place these around in different points on the dock them to the screen, and eventually right click and bring up perhaps the view. So you'll see there's incredible great number of different things that you can bring up in terms of toolbars. Now I want to point out, as I bring this one down and push it down here in the center, down here in the bottom, that all the drafting aside, and the geometry we've been working on so far has been things that you can draft for the most part with lines, offset, fillets, either whether they be fillet radius zeros or fillets, arrays in terms of copying sets of things, polyline edit for putting them together, breaks, putting them together, making regions to give them area, trims and extends, sets of commands. But it's important at this point to start developing habits to keep things on different layers. And so that's one of the great uses it would turn out to be of this layer command bar here. And I'm actually going to bring up right click the layers too. Layers are so important, they've got two toolbars. And I'll show you that those toolbars there are very much akin to the commands that you see right here across on the layer ribbon. And so what shows in the layers here is the current layer you're drafting on. So if I put down a line right now from here to here, I've taken my hand off the mouse, I've got the F8 ortho on, and I'm going to give it 20 long. If I put a line there, that line is on layer center line. And if I look up here, layer center line, right, is going to have some definitions. And the way you look at those definitions for center line is to click the layer property manager. The key in is -LA, but the layer property manager here, it brings up this interface here. And this is the interface in which you make changes to the layers. In other words, make changes to the family of everything on center line. So center line will all be red. They'll have a line type called center. And I'll go through these now. On or off says whether they're on or off. Freeze or thaw on is very similar to on or off. Lock or unlock. Color that they display on the screen. This has no relationship to what they may or may not plot when you plot them. Line type, as we start talking about different line types, continuous, center, hidden, and then all kinds of coded ones. Line weight. Again, we remember lines have no weight in reality, but we can make them look like they have weight. In other words, lines are not thick at all. They have zero width. Plot style for when we get to plotting, very important, whether or not you want this to plot or not. And then here you'll see this here is going to be the new viewport frozen stuff is going to be important if you get into higher level plotting stuff. So how do you go about making a new layer? Well, the best thing to do is to go to layer that you want to kind of generally approximate and then click this make a new layer. It puts a new layer there. You can rename it. So this is going to be new layer, and you can go through and click it on. You can change its color. And the base colors, the colors are actually numbered 1 through 255 plus more beyond that. But in terms of color, I'm going to go ahead and change that to there. Now the color of the layer is blue, and I can make that layer current by double clicking over here. So you go about setting or changing layers that way, and that becomes really important. Now if you notice there, I can, if something is in my way, I can either erase it sometimes if I really don't want it, but it's probably more important perhaps to just put it on a layer that you're going to keep, like no-show, a layer called no-show. So let's show how we can put something on a layer called no-show. First you've got to make that layer, so you go to someplace like new layer here. I'm going to click on that, make a new layer. I'm going to call that layer no-show. Right? And I'm actually then going to set that layer current if I would. And often when I pull on something like this, because my screen you're not seeing the whole bit of it, but that layer no show now exists. That layer no show, I can do a number of things. One thing you want to really get used to is the easiest way to change something about any entity is to click on it with your left click, right click, and go to properties, and that's going to give you your greatest set of choices. So in this case I'm going to change the layer property of that thing to the layer no show, right? And once again I hit escape here, it now is on layer no show. If I draft another line right now, it is on no show as well. If I draft a circle, it's on no show. And so this is the current layer. If I offset something through, it's on no show. Though there's going to be a great set of tools here for changing the layer of things by doing things like right there, match properties is a really big one. So this concept of properties is big. And like I said before, what we might want to do at this point is to go ahead into our layer manager, and we might want to put our current layer maybe to view here, and then we might want to freeze the no-show layer. If I do that, it's not that they're erased, it's that they're gone. And what I want to now finally show you, if you're dealing with layers, the most important thing to learn to use is all the way over here. It is Layer Manager. We click on that if we like the way it's set up. We say New and we give it a name. No Show State February 15th or 34th. I hit OK. I hit close. Now that layer state is saved. So that once you get layers set up a certain way, you want to definitely get in the habit of using the Layer States Manager. That is incredibly important. It's probably more important than even learning how to make layers, learning to develop the habit of using Layer States Manager. Layer States Manager, layers, toolbars. We'll go from there. Thanks for listening.